Welcome to the Archaeology Studio. Today's episode returns to the book review corner. In this case, looking at a book about the intellectual history of archaeology. At one point or another, every student or professional in archaeology needs to learn how the discipline of archaeology developed as a field of study, leading to the current situation of theory, method, and technique. With this knowledge, you can situate your current and future work, and you can clarify the significance of your new discoveries and contributions. This historical view is valuable for every field of study. Archaeology in particular developed through a complicated history of thoughts and ideas due to the interface with other disciplines, such as geology, history, anthropology, and more. Nearly every published work in archaeology, and generally in academia, refers to how it makes a new and different contribution of knowledge. If you do not already know the history of thought and practice in archaeology, then you cannot evaluate the potential significance of a new claim. In this respect, at least some awareness of the history of archaeology is necessary. Here I will focus on one book that I have found to be most useful as a standard reference about the intellectual history of archaeology. Specifically, I am looking at Bruce Trigger's influential book, A History of Archaeological Thought. The first edition of this book was published in 1989, and the second edition was published in 2006. The second edition in 2006 provided important updates of the original first edition. Especially for the years of the 1980s and onwards, the second edition offers a more informed perspective. The book in total exceeds 700 pages, nearly all in text with very few illustrations. The front matter includes a new preface for the second edition. This part is most helpful for clarifying what makes the second edition different, and then probably most people will not need to look at the first edition of the book. The main text accounts for more than 500 pages. The text reads like a history book. It follows a chronological order of how the discipline of archaeology developed through more than 100 years. The reference bibliography is nearly 100 pages in length. A comprehensive index is about 30 pages. The main text offers a historical narrative of what happened through the intellectual development of archaeology as a field of study. The primary focus here is on the intellectual perspectives and schools of thought that have influenced archaeology. The text outlines basically what happened in the intellectual history with a few examples of each major perspective and school of thought. I have found this book to be most effective as an independent reference. Once in a while, I look back into certain parts of this book for clarifications about the origins and development of one or another particular perspective or school of thought in archaeology. For instance, many of the works by authors using a postmodernism perspective refer to themselves as advancing a school of post-processual archaeology. And this portrayal would imply a pre-existing school of processual archaeology. In my view, these portrayals are problematically biased and misleading, yet these deficiencies can be corrected by learning more about the history of archaeological thought, preferably through an independent sourcebook. Many of the issues about postmodernism and subsequent ideas were not yet resolved at the time when the first edition of A History of Archaeological Thought was published in 1989. In this respect, the second edition in 2006 was equipped to offer a more informed narrative of how postmodernism affected scholarly thought in archaeology. This part of the book was disappointing for me because mostly it followed the viewpoint of the self-proclaimed post-processualists in archaeology without questioning the self-claimed definition and purpose of post-processualism. Nonetheless, I can appreciate the effort in outlining the individual schools of thought in their own terms. In this case, as a reader of this book, I can apply my own critical thinking, and I can encourage all readers to do the same. At any given point in time, a history of thought in archaeology or in any discipline logically meets the limit of when it was published. Inevitably, the history will need to be updated with continued work over the next years and decades. The basic facts, of course, do not change about what happened in the history of archaeological thought. Rather, new updates would focus on the most recent years of new developments. This book does not attempt to summarize the major material discoveries and findings in world archaeology. If you want to learn about the most important archaeological sites and artifacts around the world, then you would need to look for a different book about world archaeology. Most introductory textbooks include at least a basic summary of world archaeology. Otherwise, for more detailed information, I recommend to search for an overview summary of the geographical region of your interest. A regional summary can provide the specific information of sites and discoveries, and then you can add this information into a worldwide view of the history of archaeological thought and practice. Overall, the second edition of A History of Archaeological Thought can serve as a useful reference probably for the next several years or maybe longer. On its own, this book is incomplete, but it can become most valuable when you apply your own critical thinking and when you add other knowledge about research in a specific region, time period, or topic. Ideally, this information can provide a context for situating any new work in archaeology and clarifying what makes this new work significant in the ongoing history of archaeological thought. In concluding this episode, now you should be familiar with some of the major issues for evaluating a book about the intellectual history of archaeology. I reviewed just one popular book here. How would you evaluate this book or other options? Please remember to subscribe to this channel, share with your friends, and explore more online videos with the Archaeology Studio.